Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Well, hello and welcome to, or if you're a return listener, welcome back to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you for coming along on the journey of this show that is designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show along with Craig Brown, an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm great, Tom. Just finished watching the World Series. It was wonderful.
Well, of course,
leave it at that.
By the time this airs, nobody will even remember who played in the World Series. So
that's probably true.
So today's show is actually sponsored by Vertex, and our guest is actually from Vertex. So Vertex Software, they make 3D team collaboration with your team's simple and fast results in mind. Their visual product stories unite your most important teams, from internal teams to external suppliers, partners, and customers. Bring them together into a secure, scalable platform. Vertex helps connect teams so that you can make better decisions. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We have Matt Hein, and every single week we try to bring to this podcast really interesting interviews and ideas that are going to help the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And I'm pretty sure Matt is going to add to that. So Matt, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thanks, Tom. I'm glad to be here.
So Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about your backstory? We don't really read like bios that are sent to us by marketing people. So Matt, who are you? What's your background? And tell us a little more about Vertex.
My background, if I go all the way back, I became really interested in engineering drawing and drafting back in high school. And that also, right around that time is when I was exposed to CAD and really became interested in CAD and product design. And then that took me to college, where I majored in mechanical engineering and spent some time in manufacturing during college and right out of college. But then one thing that really started to interest me is just the rapid iterations of design. And I realized that software, I could get much more rapid iterations in software than I could in mechanical design. And so I started looking into CAD and VR. I spent some time in grad school, kind of in computer graphics and cloud space. And that's kind of what led me down my path of CAD visualization and cloud software and things like that.
So Matt, this is, you and I have met over the past months, and we've been chatting about how to do this better 3D collaboration. But you also had one other experience in implementing cloud technology for other industries. Yeah. And so your mechanical engineering degree, but this other interest in cloud computing are kind of meshing together. How do you think that's going to help visualization now?
Yeah, it's interesting. The previous company that I was with got started in cloud software around 2008, and right around that time is when you really started to see the cloud offerings from Amazon and Google start to take shape right around that time. And the initial market that we entered with that company was in financial services, and which was completely unrelated to mechanical engineering and visualization, but it was with the group of guys that I ran circles with in grad school and things like that. So our core competency was cloud and viz, but the financial industry was just, I think, a lot more ready and willing to take on cloud at that point. And you're starting to see that with manufacturing today. But I think part of the reason why it's just now starting versus 10 years ago is that it's really hard to do, Viz and cloud. It's not a non-trivial computer science problem, right? Otherwise, it would have been done a while ago, right?
Well, that's a good point. Sometimes just you got to wait till things mature, or if you will, ripen on their own.
Right.
I'm intrigued a bit about talking. I'm seeing more and more vendors. As I retired, I started looking at other industries. I was at a conference recently where they also started talking about the importance of software as a service, right?
Yeah.
And in particular, making that more affordable for smaller companies. And one of the things that Digital Enterprise Society is all about is trying to help the especially smaller and medium-sized manufacturers embrace digital technologies more. Is that a similar strategy to where Vertex wants to go? Is it a lower cost of entry, or maybe you can explain a bit about what you guys are crafting for helping out the small and medium-sized manufacturers?
Yeah, I think the great thing about SaaS, it's great for the customer because they're not locked into a huge multi-year enterprise deal where there's a risk that the software ends up becoming shelfware. When you're SaaS, that the vendor has to earn your business,
and earn it continuously, because you could just choose to stop paying and you wouldn't use it then, right?
Absolutely. Right. So when you buy, let's say a multi-year traditional software, you're buying that DVD to install. And maybe you get some maintenance updates and things like that, but during that time, that 3 years, that vendor is working continuously on improving the product for the next 3-year cycle, right? With SaaS, you get all that value of continuous development right then and there. And part of this too is, I think, what's great is most SaaS companies are very customer centric because they have to be, because of this earning their business every single renewal cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of direct customer feedback that you can tap into and improve the product immediately. And the customer doesn't have to wait for IT to install that. It just gets delivered straight to them. And and you can have that iterative design cycle with the customers and really improve the product that way.
Yeah, and then I was thinking more also about was SaaS an enabler for the financial community, or was it more of the whole Sarbanes-Oxley regulatory environment that forced them to need something better, right? I mean, maybe cloud and Sarbanes-Oxley just by sheer luck showed up at the same time.
It is. If I think back to 2008, where you started to see some financial services companies start to adopt this model. At the time, it's like, wait, you want us to store our sensitive financial information with Google? Like that's crazy. But if you think about, once you start really talking to them about the benefits of cloud and the transparency that you get with that, and the controls and restrictions, and instead of saying, well, you're emailing this spreadsheet around to people, that could go anywhere. With cloud, like, you have all the granular control and transparency. So I think once you start to kind of educate customer IT teams and the customers themselves on the benefits of cloud, I think they really get it right away and see the value.
And that Excel exchange practice, we'll call it, it's really not good, but nonetheless, that's what people do. A lot of engineering companies do it, and we were just in a discussion yesterday where we were talking about, well, how did that happen? Well, part of it was the price of entry. It was just cheap, right? And another part of it is the complicated systems to put everything into one monolithic computer-aided everything system just are really difficult to build. And then once you build them, they're really difficult to keep them current, right?
Right.
So So you've touched a bit on it. Actually, is more secure in the cloud, but a lot of engineering companies, whether they be defense industry or they be car companies like what I came from, they're still unsure about security in the cloud. Have you guys thought about that, and have you got an answer to it, or are you just going to hope to ride the wave of cloud enthusiasm, if I will?
Yeah, it is interesting for me. I think there is a little bit of reluctance in manufacturers about adopting the cloud, and part of it is, again, just what are the offerings that they have? Have they had to been exposed to the cloud yet? Have they gone through a security review with a cloud vendor before? I think for the most part, when at Vertex, when we go into a customer, we might be the first cloud company that they've ever had to really deal with, and so it's part of on us to educate them about what should they be looking into with a cloud vendor, the security model, educating them on best practices and how we work. I think part of it's education, and just having gone through a few vendors before and realizing the benefits of it. But we are riding a wave right now. I think most companies are going through a digital transformation process. They're starting to hire CIOs and having real core discipline in IT around cloud. And I think you're starting to see CIOs go from no cloud policies to cloud first, or is there a cloud vendor out there for this? If not, we might look somewhere else. But let's look at what the cloud has to offer.
Well, and a lot of the Fortune 50 companies. I mean, we all have our own clouds for this. At least
Right.
where cloud technology was 4 or 5 years ago. We didn't want to rely on Amazon or Google, who are in the Fortune 5 these days, to just manage it, right? But I think even that'll be a cost of ownership thing. Once the security thing is audited, proven, certainly better than what we got today, then somebody will look at the total cost of ownership and say, well, if let's just use Google as an example, if they've earned our trust, well, then we're likely to really embrace it, right?
Yeah.
And I think from your vantage point, as one of the technical leads at Vertex, you of course got to make sure you can work either place, I would think, right?
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think the hybrid route, I think, is initially going to be a way of greasing the skids to get to cloud. I think that's more digestible for a lot of companies. But I remember I had an opportunity to see Jeff Bezos speak in 2008 about Amazon Web Services, and at the time, they didn't have a whole lot, but he was kind of painting the vision for people. And the analogy that he used then was that if you think about in the early 1900s, if you were a manufacturer or a brewery or whatever, not only did you have to be competent at what you're doing there, but you also built a power plant to operate your
That's true. Right.
manufacturing company. And so, over time they realized, well, our core competency is not sourcing coal and coal-fired power plants. Our competency is making beer. And so you start to see the rise of those utilities. And I think that's eventually what the industry will be. And I think hybrid's going to be that initial step towards that. But I think ultimately there's going to be that utility of cloud computing out there for everyone.
Okay, interesting. So let's talk a bit about the next generation of workers. You and I are separated by a couple decades, but there's a group coming that's a couple decades younger than you, right?
Yeah.
And they grew up in this world since the iPhone and the whole Facebook phenomena, which I'm not a big fan of personally. But nonetheless, they are very used to interacting with people anywhere in the world to help answer a question, whether that be a social thing or whether it even be a professional thing. So that form of collaboration is becoming, I would say, expected by folks certainly in their 20s and maybe even early 30s, right? So from a Vertex point of view, are you trying to be an advantage? I'm thinking mostly about, are you more focused on that generation or on people like me in our 50s and 60s who really do understand that computers can help, but maybe are not yet embracing in a device in every room kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time right now. I think you have a whole generation of mechanical engineers that are about to go into retirement. And I was at a conference and I heard an aerospace company talk about how half of their engineers are over the age of 55, and that within 10 years they're all going to be gone. They'll take retirement, and who's going to replace them? Well, it's going to be kids coming out of college, and those they have certain expectations of being connected 24/7, being a part of a global community, being able to get work done on their phone. You might not be designing a new CAD part from scratch on an iPhone, but a good chunk of product design and development is just basic communication, right? And so the next generation of tools, any software vendor right now, they're thinking about cloud, they're thinking about mobile, they're thinking about social, they're thinking about connectivity. How do we make this a collaborative application? And really, that's the core of Vertex is, we took all of those concepts and said, if we were to redesign visualization today, what would it look like? And we try to think about that next generation for sure.
So this is what attracted me to you and a couple of my peers that are equally retired as I am. we're kind of surprised that, we wrote down words like make it visual or visualize it or make all decisions in the context of 3D geometry. And then I can remember talking to executives a decade ago, and I said, and it should be in your hand, right? Meaning your phone, right? That just come out. And a lot of people said, oh, you'll never make it secure, and why would you do that, and so on. And then you guys got my attention early this year, and you said, well, hey, look at this. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's what I asked for 10 years ago. So, so I'm glad it's finally here. And lo and behold, like always, it seems like it comes from a new startup. It doesn't come from a tried and true industrial giant who's got all this money and time. And the truth is, we're all worried about other things these days, including electrification of all vehicles.
Right.
So it's not surprising that it comes from somebody like you. What fascinated me was that you just, you took cloud technology to maybe the most paranoid world, the financial world. and now you're bringing it to engineering. You're like, well, why would engineering object if we can satisfy Wall Street, right? So that's pretty fascinating to me. What is it you think? What you've been doing this now a few months? What surprised you the most as you've begun to talk to prospective customers about this? Kind of like, are you aware of the surprises, or do you keep getting surprised?
I love being back in manufacturing and CAD and talking to customers about their problems, because it brings me back to when I was on the shop floor thinking through these things. And it does surprise me about, you'll go to these conferences on PLM and CAD, and everyone's saying the right things and knows, has a good understanding of what the vision should be. But I'm always surprised about what their current process is. And it's not that much different than 25 years ago, right? And part of it is the tools catching up. Part of it is that there's some tradition and practices that that have been put in place to ensure quality and things like that. And so I think I was taken a little bit aback by how things still seem to be stuck in the 1990s for a lot of these companies.
You and I were at a conference in May together, and there was a gentleman from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Dr. Thomas Hedberg. And Thomas and I have been debating over the summer a bit of this. We had him on a podcast earlier, and he commented, he said, "Oh yeah. It's not just what you said. It's also they're cylinders of excellence. You just got to appreciate that they're cylinders of excellence." And so, like any group of people that are a trade or a focused skills that have a proven track record, it's really hard to take them apart or teach a new way of doing things, because their first comment is going to be and will affect quality, and we don't want to do that, right? So it's a interesting thought. I hadn't really said it that way. I had always been drawing pictures about silos and people not, like feudal medieval things where people didn't want to cooperate, and in fact it's much harder than that. It really is a bastion of quality practices. Even a bunch of professionals like a practice. Mike Greaves, in one of his books, talked about it's more about the practice, where the 5 experts get together and talk about what to do about a particular thing. Well, that's a cylinder of excellence, right? So now you show up and you say, well, I've got a brand new way of thinking, working, and oh, by the way, the 20-year-olds expect it. They're all kind of like, they even become more defensive, right? You're like, well, we're not going to let them into the club.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. On the other hand, there's a great change, or maybe lack of change, in how computers are replacing people, or at least the fear that computers are replacing people. And so some of those cylinders sometimes feel bureaucratic in nature, where they're preventing change, and maybe it's more out of fear than out of anything else. Do you sense that, or do you sense it's just a generational thing?
I don't necessarily think it's generational. It's just that the structures have been built up over time. And by the way, I would say software architectures kind of exhibit the same patterns. Where
okay, that's interesting.
over the course of many years, you just build up a lot of complexity, and that ensures a certain type of quality. And it's very hard to make changes to that architecture, if you will, once it kind of proves itself out. And it's hard to introduce something new without, a startup, or, even think about, a lot of companies that we work with, there will be, and so Craig, some rebels like you, for example, saying like, hey, we want to do something drastically different, but we're not going to roll this out to all of the engineers in the company. Like, let's start out something small and see what could we really do if we had new capabilities? Would we still have to do all these existing practices?
Yeah, so you do it on a new product, or you do it on a low volume product, and if the early adopters get it, then you'll think about a broader deployment, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the Digital Enterprise Society, one of the things we're trying to do is create this discussion that Thom and I have started with podcasts, and also create webinars. And you guys are doing one of these early webinars in a few weeks on I think the title is something about, what the next generation expects. Can you give us kind of a prelude? What are you guys going to teach us in that webinar?
Yeah, and I think we've touched on a few of these things already, but it's the mobility. I think it's thinking purely in 3D, and I don't think this next generation is really thinking about 2D drawings. And even at this point, after someone does a design in 3D, it's almost tedious work to go in and say, oh, I guess I need to provide dimensioning on this now. Like, it's
right.
I think the next generation expects, like, hey, I used a 3D tool to build this, and all the information is contained in the 3D. I've designed this or additive, or I've designed this. I didn't even design this. I put in I put in the constraints and then ran an FEM simulation, and here's the 300 different designs that that I could possibly pick, and here's some material recommendations for it. And so that's, kind of in the curriculum right now, and that's what is going to be expected in the future. And I think, there's kind of a rude awakening when you get in and you're like, oh, wow, this is not what I had access to at school.
Well, yeah, I was a mentor to a handful of recent college graduates, all under 30, and over half of them, some of them accepted it because they'd done a co-op thing, but this whole point about drawings versus interacting with the 3D model, a couple of them were really frustrated that they even had to think about a 2D drawing, right? And they were accusing me for allowing it to happen. So I wasn't that I'm a complete radical. I had all this influence from younger folks. The other thing that amazes me, you said it well, the tedium of putting on the information in a drawing format. Computers can decorate a lot of that. I mean, maybe even 90% of it, especially if like a car company, you're building the same thing over and over with the same kind of tooling. All you really did was change some edges in the paint color of the vehicle, right? So it's a little short-sighted, I think, of companies to say, well, if you need, PMI, product manufacturing information, on your model, fine, put it on the model, but don't put it on the drawing. And by the way, any of it that you can auto-generate from a best practice or whatever, you ought to do that. You shouldn't make the human being enter that. This is one of these jobs humans hate. It's error prone, so then you put in quality checkers to double check it. And then when you still have a failure on the line, you got to go back and, oh yeah, we messed up that data, right? So I think this is a place where computer automation would really pay off. And I think the generation will force it. They'll sit there and go, this is ridiculous. I'm wasting time doing this information. And if they're wasting time, eventually they'll find a better job, especially in this kind of job market. So
absolutely,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's been a joy chatting with you, as it always is. I look forward to our future collaborations. And Thom, you got any last thoughts or questions for Matt?
Yeah. So Matt, because Vertex is the sponsor of this episode, I just wanted to make sure, is there anything you need everybody to know about Vertex?
I think what we're trying to do is really, if we think through the entire episode here, we're designing the next generation of tools for design engineers. And what's important is that when you're looking at software these days, you need to be thinking about cloud, thinking about mobile, social, collaboration. Also, one aspect of this too is platform. A lot of companies are saying that, the software that you're building is interesting, but we're also interested in the tools that you're using yourself to build that software. And so Vertex really, I think, is, right in the mix of all those technologies, and we're thinking about it for the next generation. And we're very excited to be in the market now, and we're getting a lot of traction. So it's really fun for us here.
So Matt, if someone's listening to this and they're like, yep, we need to know what Vertex is doing, or they're thinking, hey, I need to talk to Matt about something that he said, how do they find you and how do they find the company?
The company's website is vertexbiz.com. You can find all the information that you need on there. And feel free to reach out to me directly, matt.heying, Heying, at vertexbiz.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. And thank you to Vertex for being the sponsor of this episode. So join us next week, everyone, because every single week, Craig and I try really hard, and I think we succeed, to bring you more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org.